Alrighty, so let's see. So we are in chapter 3, if I remember correctly. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the power of language. Oh, I hope I brought a marker. Oh, good. Cleaned out my bag the other day. Didn't remember to put most things back in it. So we're going to be talking about the power of language, and particularly the power of language to be used as a weapon, and how it can shape the way we think, how it can shape the way we understand things being said, questions being asked, how it changes, how it can shape what we believe, the decisions we make, and so on. Okay, so your chapter starts out with the cookware conundrum. Did I spell conundrum right? I think I spelled conundrum right. No. There we go. Conundrum. You know, the difference between good spellers and bad spellers is that good spellers double check. Okay, the cookware conundrum. So, it sort of perfectly illustrates what we're going to be talking about today, where it was this situation where the author was at a sales presentation for this magical cookware, and it was sold as like a no-loss cookware. Does anybody like to cook? Yeah, okay. A few of you. I like to cook too, and if you cook a lot of meat or you grill a lot of meat, you know that one thing that happens when you cook is that you lose a lot of the juices in whatever you're cooking. Okay, so you'll cook, say, a pound of meat, and you'll end up with three-quarters of a pound, something like that, at the end of cooking, because all the good, yummy juices come out of it. Okay, and it kind of dries up. And the more you cook it, the less it's going to weigh. So if you cook something well done, it's going to weigh significantly less than it did when it was raw. Okay, so this cookware is special because it seals in all of the juices and you don't lose anything. Okay, and as a cook, you think that's wonderful. And then later on in the presentation, it's sold. They present it. They cook up this chicken and they get a half a cup of fat out of it, and so it's also great at reducing the fat in whatever you're cooking. And why would you be upset about that when, you know, oftentimes you're told that fat is bad for you? Oh, the fat's not bad. Sugar's bad for you, but whatever. That's a whole nother class lecture. Okay, so it also reduces fat. Sounds like a great piece of cookware, right? For those of you who cook, would you want to buy something like this? Do you see any problem with this sales presentation?
Aren't they kind of conflicting?
They're conflicting. Yes. You can't have no loss and then also reduce the fat in what you're cooking. Okay? You've just lost fat. Hello, Daisy. Talk to me after class, okay? I've got your ad thing figured out. All right, so they're conflicting, okay? They're equally at odds with the opposite statement. And yet they were able to sell a lot of cookware. Why is this? What do you think that they did? I mean, there's one very obvious thing that is on the board that you can see.
Maybe they put the two statements farther apart from each other, like in the presentation.
Okay, so time-wise, the time of the presentation was different. Okay, it wasn't for you guys, and it still tricked you. But in the sales presentation, it was like a half hour apart. Okay, so it was enough time to forget quite exactly what was said, just to remember that it was great. And so you're sort of left with the emotions, but not with the ability to think logically. Okay. Another one is that the wording is different. In this one, it was juices, right? And in this one, it's fat. It's the same thing. Okay, or at least relatively the same. Okay. Technically speaking, it is going to be the same thing. The fat that you render down is the juices. All of the nutrients, protein, water, and everything that comes out with the fat is the same as what the juices are. Okay, that's what makes the food tasty. So you don't want to lose a lot of it. That's why you sear meat before cooking it, so that you seal in those juices. Okay? And any cookware has the ability to do that to some degree, but can't do it perfectly. That's just how cookware works. Okay, so the point being that the way it was presented and the wording used was used in order to trick people into purchasing this product, despite the premises being absolutely in conflict. But it can be very difficult and tricky to catch these things when they're used professionally, okay, when they're used really well. They're weapon words, okay? Another type of weapon word, or to be more specific with the wording, we're going to go over some good weapon words. Something we call weasel words, okay? And that's sort of what this example means, weasel words. Okay. So weasel words, it refers to language that's deliberately used in order to influence your thinking. Okay. So words used to influence your thinking, but specifically on superficial grounds. What does superficial mean? What does superficial mean? If I say, oh, that's very your writing is superficial. Generic, shallow. Okay, there's not a lot of meat behind it. There's not a lot of evidence, not a lot of research, not a lot of details behind it. Okay, so in the cookware example, the superficiality of it was just tricking you on the nuances of the word juices versus fats. Okay, it's very superficial reasoning for why you should buy their product. Okay, we get the term weasel words because weasels will eat eggs. They like to eat eggs, but they'll suck all the juices out of the eggs and then they'll leave the eggs intact. Okay, so it looks like there's something there, but it's really empty, if that makes sense. Okay, so weasel words are empty words, but they're tricky in that they influence your thinking. I always feel like they need booby traps in classrooms. Like they're constantly tripping you and getting things in your way and so on. Okay. So they're calculated. Okay. They're manipulative. But they're also tricky because at the end of the day, you can't really pin people down on it. It's not like what they said is necessarily wrong in many cases, although in this case they're conflicting. But usually it leaves just enough room for them to weasel their way out of a situation, okay, which can make weasel words particularly difficult to handle in an argument, and why it's important for us to recognize them. And often because they are superficial, because they are shallow, many times we dismiss it as not important, and our brain doesn't latch on to it. So just like your brain didn't latch on to the nuance between juices and fat until it was pointed out, okay, that's what weasel words do. Because it's superficial, our brain doesn't immediately go, oh, that's important, that's a big deal, pay attention to those differences. Okay. So here's where it can get really interesting from a psychological perspective, okay? So even our most deeply held beliefs can be influenced by this sort of wording difference, okay? So like reframing, for instance, taking that, not reframing, framing. I'm thinking about therapy right now. Reframing is a technique that we use in therapy with people. Okay. So framing is the concept of word choices, weasel words being one of them. Okay, so how we frame things can influence our decisions. So there was an experiment that was done that was really fascinating where researchers asked people about free speech. And they split them into two groups. And in group one, they said, should we allow anti-democracy speeches? Should we allow people to make speeches against democracy? And in group one, 62% said no. In group 1, should we allow anti-democracy speech? And in group 2, they said, should we forbid anti-democracy speech? And in group 2, they said 54% said no. So just that one word, should we allow it or should we forbid it, completely changed the question in terms of whether the speech content was acceptable. Okay. So when we said, should we allow it, it was sort of triggering people to think about their freedoms, right? What is allowable? Okay. Whereas should we forbid it, it was limiting their freedoms. Should my freedom be limited? Okay. So even though over 50% said we shouldn't allow anti-democracy speech, also over 50% said that we shouldn't forbid it, which doesn't make sense, right? If 62% say we should allow it, then it should be, 38% saying that it's okay to forbid it. Which of course isn't what we calculated it out to be. Or 38%. Okay, so 54% still were not okay with it being forbidden, even though they were also not okay with it being allowed. So do you see the nuance here just between how you think about these two words? You got the same people to make contradictory answers. Okay. And so this is something that we call psychological reactance. We react to certain words rather than thinking logically about the content, thinking logically about what we're being asked. We don't like to be forbidden, especially as Americans. This very much goes against American culture. So to say we don't allow something is different than saying you're forbidden from it. Right? There's a different emotional content to that word. And so people don't like it. They react poorly to it. We naturally resist threats to our autonomy. Okay? So we resist threats to autonomy. What does autonomy mean? Come on, guys. What does autonomy mean? What is an autonomous creature? An autonomous robot. Is AI autonomous yet? Better hope not.
It acts on its own will?
It acts on its own will. Okay? It can make choices for itself. So we don't like when threats to our free will happen. We don't like being limited. Okay? And this is culturally based. It's also gender based. So Western culture, people like us, okay, people from individualistic cultures, America, Western Europe, Australia, so on, we respond worse to it than people from collectivistic cultures like China and Japan. Although they still don't like it. Nobody likes it. Okay? Everybody wants free will. But culturally, there are stronger reactions in some cultures. And then gender-wise, men react more strongly to this than women, although both men and women want autonomy. We both want independence and free will. But women are either programmed or socialized to not be quite as bothered by it. I personally think we're genetically programmed because if you have children, then you don't get a lot of autonomy, so you have to be kind of willing to let go of some of that autonomy so that children don't drive you crazy. This doesn't want to erase. That's better. Okay, so psychological reactance. Certain words are perceived as threats, and so we don't like them. And we react to the emotions of the wording rather than what it actually means. And you can see this played out in all sorts of real-world issues, such as the abortion debate. Okay, So you've got pro-choice and pro-life. What is this really saying? Is it saying that I support abortion or I don't support abortion? What is the framing around this? And one gets more psychological reactance than another.
The pro-life one, maybe it's like more positive. We see life as more positive than like pro-choice.
Yeah, so I'm supporting life. I'm supporting humanity. I believe in life, not death. Right? It's more than just I don't support abortion, right? And the same with pro-choice. What is pro-choice saying? What's the framing? I mean, it's very obvious. It's not a trick question. It's supporting choice. It's saying it's free will, right? So, and both sides are framing these purposely to kind of get to that psychological nuance that I care about life and the other side doesn't. And pro-choice is I care about free will and personal choice and the other side doesn't, which is both baloney, right? Unless you're Jeffrey Dahmer or something, you care about life, okay? Everybody cares about choice and free will. Everybody cares about life. Okay, so it's really just I'm pro-abortion or I'm anti-abortion. And even that is really kind of limited framing. We'll get into that more when we talk about false dichotomies later on. But this is framing it with personal freedom, right? That's the framing. This is about personal freedom. And therefore, if you don't support abortion, you don't support personal freedom, which is a false conclusion. Because you can be against abortion and still support personal freedom. Like, just because you're against abortion doesn't mean you're fascist or communist or something like that, right? It just simply means you don't approve of abortion. And then pro-choice is framing it as life is valued, right? And therefore, if you're not anti-abortion, you don't value life, which again is a false premise, or a false conclusion to their premise, right? Their premises are bad. And therefore there's a false conclusion. Okay, now obviously this is sort of like inflammatory language to trigger that psychological reactance to try to get you to think on their side. Okay, but neither one of these is really neither one is using unemotional logic on either side of these. Okay. So they're triggering psychological reactance on purpose. Okay. So let's show another example. Your book came with this example, which is pretty good. So the Asian disease program. Okay. I think this was written before COVID, so we're not talking about COVID here. Just talking about some random disease. Okay. I don't know why it had to be Asian, but that was the example in the book, not mine. All right. So in this example, there's a disease in Asia that is running rampant, and they've come up with a cure for it, and you have to choose which one. Okay, so 600 people are expected to be killed by this. In reality, we wouldn't even care if only 600 people were being killed by a disease, but there we have it. Okay, so scenario A. Okay, you've got program A and program B. In program A, if we use this program to try to cure the disease, 200 people will be saved. Okay, guaranteed. We've got 200 people that will be saved. Program B, there's a third of a chance that 600 people will be saved. 600 people saved. And then 2/3 a chance that the rest of them, or 2/3 a chance that nobody will be saved. Okay, so 200 people will be saved, or a third chance that 600 people will be saved, that everybody will be saved, and 2/3 chance that nobody will be saved. Which one are you going to take?
It's the same thing.
Tricky. It's the same thing. But which one are you going to choose anyways? You have to choose one. Which one do you like better? A. Okay. Now, here is scenario B. Okay. So with C, program C, 400 people of the 600 will die. Okay. Guaranteed if we do this program. In program D, let's see, a third chance that nobody dies. And 2/3, oops, what am I writing here? 2/3 chance. Did I write Emma? Well, my brain is on autopilot this morning. Okay, third chance nobody dies. I can't even spell. And 2/3 chance that 600 will die. Which one do you do? So 400 people will die, period, or a third of a chance nobody dies, and 2/3 of a chance that all 600 will die. So it's not really the same thing, okay? Because you're saying there's a chance that all or none, okay? Third chance. This one, you're guaranteeing 400 people will die. This one, you're saying there's a third of a chance that nobody dies. 2/3 of a chance that everybody dies. Which one do you take? Do you take the gamble or do you go with the for sure? You guys don't like making these decisions, huh? For sure. Okay, we've got one for sure. So you're willing to kill 400 people just right off the bat to save the other 200. What about the rest of you? Daisy's confident. Come on, guys. It's not actually going to happen, okay? You're not actually deciding people's fates. It's not like Ender's Game or whatever. Have you seen that movie? No. Oh, gosh. You guys, that's such a good movie. All right. Really? Come on. Be brave.
I choose the same thing as you.
You're going to choose the same thing? What about you? Come on.
I'll say B.
You say B?
B.
A D, I mean?
B.
Does anybody... Well, this is scenario 2, so we're on this side now.
Never mind.
You say B on there?
Gamble.
I'll take the
Huh?
gamble.
You're going to take the gamble? Gamble? Anybody else with the gamble? Raise your hand if it's a gamble. Okay, raise your hand if it's a for sure. You're... All right. So you guys are almost 50-50, maybe a little bit more on D. Most people choose D, okay? And here, most people choose A. Why?
I was framed.
How it's framed. Okay, because it's really the same scenario, but it's being framed differently. It's being framed with saved versus dead. Okay? So, even though it's mathematically the same, people don't like to risk when it's in the positive side, when it's saved. But if they're losing, they're more willing to take risk. You see this in Vegas too, all the time. Okay? So this is what we call the prospect theory. We have different attitudes towards risk depending on the situation that we're in. So losses hurt more than gains. Okay. So as you're losing with gambling, or maybe you're doing like Forex or stock market stuff, and you're heading down into the negative, you're more likely to take risks. So it's something that stockbrokers deal with all the time, or not stockbrokers, but the people playing the stock market and stuff. That when they're in the negative, they're willing to take these crazy risks. When they're in the positive, they'll usually like cut and run. So they've made hardly any money and they'll get out because they don't want to lose that. But if they are losing, that's really painful. And so they don't want that loss, and they will do everything they can to avoid the loss. And usually that means making bad decisions out of fear, and then they just dig themselves into a bigger hole, okay? Which is sort of what we do all the time, right? You can apply this to relationships. You can apply this to all sorts of things. Okay. So when framed in terms of lives saved, people were risk aversive. Okay. Risk aversive. Meaning that we didn't like risk. We wanted the guarantee. We didn't want to gamble. We're in the positive. Let's just take what we have. Cut and run. Get out while we're still ahead. But then when it was framed in terms of lives lost, people were risk willing. Willing to take the risk. And so we see this all the time in like advertisements and so on. So here's some examples like, okay, so which one would you agree to? This surgery has a 90% survival rate, or this surgery has a 10% mortality rate. Which one sounds better to you? It's the same thing. But would you rather hear 90% of people survive or 10% of people die?
90%.
We prefer 90% survive. Okay. Or how about if we pass this tax law, every family will save $500 a year. If we don't pass this law, every family will lose $500 a year. Which is more powerful? That we lose $500 a year because we don't like the risk. Okay, we don't like that risk. So if we're losing something, then we are willing to take the risk on this new law. Okay. So if you're aware of these little psychological nuances and how we frame words, then you can manipulate people easier or be manipulated easier if you're not aware of them. Okay. So something that small is going to make a big difference in the way people feel. Okay. So let's see. Let's do one more example. So let's say you're having a marital argument. Which of these is more likely to make you go to therapy? Which one is more likely to make you feel concerned about the state of your marriage, to sort of provoke urgency? If we keep going like this, we'll stay happy. Or if we keep going like this, our happiness could disappear. Right? I mean, it's obvious. The risk is more important. Okay. Or at least it feels more important. But really, you'd be better off like, things are going well, let's keep this going. But we don't. It doesn't matter as much to us. And so we often don't keep things going well. And we let things kind of slip by. But then when things are problematic, then we finally start paying attention. All right, the other part of prospect theory is that we value initial gains or losses more heavily than additional ones. Okay, so initial is gains or losses more valuable than additional ones. So if you go to a restaurant, you'll often see what framed? You see it all the time in restaurants. Has anybody ever noticed a dollar bill framed and on the wall? Sometimes other businesses have them too. I always seem to notice them most in restaurants. But a lot of business owners will frame their very first dollar they make. Not their first $100, not their first $1,000, their first dollar. Why?
Because it's the start of something.
Because it's the start of something. It's that initial gain. And that's more important than the next $100,000 that they make. That first dollar meant everything to them. That was finally their success, even though they're probably in debt and in the negative, especially as a restaurant, ever after that. They still keep that dollar framed up there. Probably be better off being in the bank account. But it means something to them. It's important. So, I mean, what means more to you? Zero. What's a bigger number, emotionally speaking? 0 to 1 million, or 1 million to $2 million? Okay, which one is bigger? Which one feels like more? 0 to 1 million or 1 million to 2 million? Okay, Daisy's what's the word for it? She likes to be contradictory. And some people's personalities are like that, and that actually does give you an advantage in resisting certain manipulations. Okay. On the other hand, it gives you disadvantage in situations where you should be trusting. So there's pros and cons to that. Some people are actually, the personality does play into that, and some people are just naturally more resistant to that sort of thing. Personality types that don't trust easily. Okay. Makes you less easily manipulated. Okay. But then when you find somebody nice, then you have a hard time actually buying into that relationship because you assume you're being manipulated. She's like, yeah. Pros and cons. There's always pros and cons. But if you're aware of that bias, then you can try to balance it out. And if you're somebody who trusts very easily, then you are more likely to fall prey to something like this. On the other hand, it's probably easier for you to have a good relationship. Just if you get into a bad situation, then you're more likely to be a victim than Daisy is. So, but Daisy's going to have more fights with her significant other than you. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. All right. Does that make any sense? Okay. And so once you get used to, like if you do Forex or play the stock market, once you get used to losing, then you don't have that freak out fear reaction that we often have with losses hurting more. So you can be trained into dealing with the pain of a loss. Okay? You can, because it's not the initial one anymore. And so the more that you've dealt with, the easier it is to deal with it. Okay. All right. So just keep in mind, one thing that I always think about this is it's unsettling to think how easy it is to sway really large consequence decisions, and oftentimes life or death decisions, even with things like this. Okay, just a simple word. Okay, so now let's talk more about how we take advantage of people, or we can be taken advantage. So there are rules to speech that we all live by, but some people don't, and we still make the assumption that they're going to, okay? And because they're willing to break the rules, then they can end up manipulating us. So we call these rules of the conversational game conversational maxims. Maxim just means rule. Okay. Conversational maxim. These are the rules of conversation. And we all have agreed to these rules somehow. Okay. I don't think that they've ever been laid out necessarily, but through interactions with other people, when we break the rules, we get in trouble or people get mad at us. We've all learned these rules despite not really knowing them. So the first one is the quality of conversation. What we say is true. We're truthful, and we have adequate evidence for what we're saying. Generally speaking, we all accept this in a conversation, that people are, for the most part, truthful and at least doing their best to use the strongest evidence that they can with what they're saying to us. So, like, if I'm talking to you and I say, research shows that being critical to your partner increases the divorce rate by 80%. You make the assumption that I'm telling you the truth, at least to the best of my knowledge, right? Which I am, by the way. Research does support that. Okay. You don't want to be critical in a relationship. So you make the assumption, and you make the assumption that I haven't just made up these conversational maxims. Unless you've read the chapter, and then you know that I haven't. But we're making the assumption that people are generally truthful in the conversations with each other. Okay? That when your sibling says, "Oh, mom's mad at you about something," that they're not just making it up. Well, they could be, and we all do have an awareness that people violate these maxims. But in general, we live by the rule that these are used. Okay. So quality is the truthfulness and basically adequacy of our evidence. Okay. And then quantity. That's the next maxim. There's 4 of these. The next maxim is saying that we are appropriately informative. Appropriately informative. That we will give the amount of information that is needed in order to help you understand what I'm saying. In order to give the most truthful telling of a situation. That I'm not going to leave things out on purpose. And I'm not going to overwhelm you with information either to trick you. We assume that when somebody tells you something that they're doing the best they can to give the proper amount of information and not leave things out. Okay. The third is relation. So with relation, that what we're saying is appropriate in relation to the argument. That is relevant. Okay, I don't know why they didn't just say relevant, but that's what it means. That this has something to do. There is a relation to my point. That I'm not just throwing in irrelevant information. Okay. And then fourth is that there's a certain manner in which we talk, which is clear and concise. We are not trying to confuse you. I'm not trying to make things difficult for you. I'm not trying to make things ambiguous or hard to understand. I'm trying to make it clear. Okay, so these aren't just good manners. This isn't just polite conversation, although it is. This is considered polite when you make a conversation with somebody. But it's also necessary for argumentation. It's necessary for being able to communicate clearly. If we don't agree to certain rules of communication, we're not going to be able to communicate. Because you can't go through every conversation wondering, is this person lying to me or not? First of all, it's exhausting. And second, we just don't have time for it. So generally speaking, we all try to follow these rules. Okay? But obviously people can take advantage of these rules. And since you assume, you have this subconscious assumption that people are following these rules, then when they break one of the rules, sometimes we don't notice because we're assuming that they're following the rules. Okay, so it's very simplistic, but it's powerful because this happens all the time to manipulate others. Okay? In a relationship, you assume your significant other is telling you the truth because that's what you do in a good relationship. But if it comes to a time when they are manipulating you and they are lying to you, it can be very difficult to catch on to that because we have the assumption that these conversational maxims are being followed. Or we assume that the person we love is going to give us the appropriate amount of information to know what's going on in their life, but they might be leaving some things out, right? Or they might be telling you much more about one thing so that they don't have to talk about something else, okay? And so when these happen, it turns into a very difficult situation. All right, so let's go through all of them. Quality. This is dishonesty, okay? Dishonesty in a conversation. So one example of it is like a health food store, okay? What does it mean that something is a health food store? What does it mean for food to be healthy?
It's good for you.
It's good for you. So is food in a grocery store not good for you? Right? It's kind of a meaningless thing, right? It's not really honest because all food has nutrients. All food is healthy in the right quantities. Now, processed food, we're going to a different thing. But you go into a health food store and tell me you're not going to find processed food in a health food store. They've got plenty, and then they call it healthy. I'm like, I don't see how that's any healthier than the crap you find in a grocery store, right? And then we make assumptions, right, of what healthy means because we don't really have a standard definition of what health food is. So if I go to a health food store, I'm going to assume that there's going to be organic food there. Do all health food stores have organic food? Or only organic food? No. They've got all sorts of conventional foods that's using pesticides and herbicides and so on. So you have this assumption, but then now you can be manipulated based on that assumption. Okay? So that label health food store is not necessarily following the quality conversational maxim. Okay? Another example is like dietary supplements. What does it mean that something is a dietary supplement? Anybody into that world? Nutrition stuff? So anything that the FDA hasn't approved as a drug can be sold as a dietary supplement. Okay, which is scary. That was a law they passed in 1994. So that's why like GNC gets sued every year for millions of dollars, and yeah, it's sort of crazy. But they don't have to prove that it works, and they have a rule that the government can't come after you for your vitamins, for your dietary supplements, unless it hurts somebody. So somebody has to be hurt first before they're allowed to be sued for their dietary supplements. Okay, it's kind of scary, right? So we assume that they're being truthful about their claims. We also assume that there's quality of evidence, that there's adequate backup by the government and their oversight that these things are actually happening, but there really isn't. There's not a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean that the supplements you buy are bad. They could be good, but we can't trust them with the current system. Okay, which is kind of scary. All right. So then we have quantity, okay? And a good example of quantity being problematic is leading questions. Okay. What is a leading question? Somebody know this? Like in the police world? Anybody into crime documentaries and cold cases and all that? Okay, so if you're interviewing a suspect, you have to be careful, or if you're in court as a lawyer or whatever, you can't use leading questions. So these are questions where you're trying to lead the person to answer in a certain way. You're trying to elicit an answer, to get an answer out of them, which can be very dangerous because it's very easy to do, okay? Leading questions, and another part of this is also false memories. Because leading questions can create false memories. Okay, so there's a researcher, I'll just talk while this works. Elizabeth Loftus. She's fascinating if you're into crime stuff at all or interested in memory. So she's done all sorts of research on implanting false memories into people. And it's really scarily easy to do. All it takes is some bad interrogation techniques, some very simple leading questions. So like one of her experiments that is very famous, let's see. See if it comes up with that. Shoot, I was hoping it would come right up. Okay, I might just have to find it for you and show you guys next week. So anyhow, she's really famous for this experiment where she showed a video of a car and a truck pulling up to a light, well, going through a red light. They were supposed to stop and hitting each other. And they asked Group A, how fast was the truck going, or how fast was the car going when it hit the truck? And the average was somewhere around like 32 miles per hour. And then they asked how fast was the car going when it smashed into the truck? And the average was 42 miles per hour. Okay, just that little word, hit versus smash. So, and that's not really too crazy, right? Because smash is more of a like intense word than hit. But what's really crazy is they also remembered that there was broken glass, which there wasn't. I don't think it talks about it in the book, but they remembered that there was an injury. And there's just all sorts of false memories that they had just by being asked that word. In another situation, they had the car and the truck drive up to a stop sign, stop, and then go through, and then had a small T-bone accident. And they asked them who hit who. Did the car hit the truck, or did the truck hit the car when it went through the yield sign? And then they answered it. And then a week later they came back and they said, did you see a stop sign or a yield sign? And what did everybody say? They saw a yield sign, even though what they saw was a stop sign. Because even though the cars went through a stop sign, the question was, who hit who after the yield sign? So simply asking it that way, they swore that they remembered seeing a yield sign, not a stop sign. Okay? And it was that easy to implant a false memory. So what does that mean for an eyewitness of a crime? It's scary, right? And that's why eyewitness testimony is believed to be only about 20% accurate. It's very inaccurate, which is scary if like you're being, taken to court on a case where you didn't do anything wrong. I wish I could find this. Let's try. That used to come up right away. So good. So it's a video of this interrogation of this poor little, I think 14-year-old boy. And it's a terrible, terrible interrogation. Well, I'll find it for you guys for next class. But I mean, this boy's just being pressured, and I think they had him in there for like 6 hours or 8 hours or something crazy, which is totally inappropriate for that age. They didn't have him in with his parents, which some states don't require that, believe it or not. California, the parents have to be there. Somebody has to be there with the kid. And these cops are just pushing and saying all sorts of manipulative things like, there's a part of you that's a good part of you and a part of you that's a bad part of you. And maybe the bad part of you doesn't remember, or the good part doesn't remember what the bad part did. And just all of these questions that are really undermining his confidence in himself. And at the end of it, he confesses to stabbing his sister to death. And he's arrested for murder. But he didn't do it. Okay. I think it was like a homeless guy that the family had hired to do some gardening work or something like that. And he's the one that did it. And luckily this guy ended up confessing, or this boy would have gone to prison for murdering his sister. Okay, all because of this terrible interrogation. And so interrogation technique is very important in order to get a true confession, because it's very easy to get a false confession. You wouldn't believe it, but it really is. It's very easy to get people to have these false memories of things that never happened to them. And Loftus and her colleagues have done all sorts of experiments where they've tried to implant and just an array of false memories, like the sprinklers going on at a grocery store and having to evacuate, memories of like having a pizza party where there was a clown at the party. I mean, just all of this stuff that didn't actually happen. And they were able to very easily, with just a little bit of manipulation of wording, implant these false memories in people. And people were confident that this had happened. They're extremely confident. Okay, so it's scary how easy it is to do this to people. Which, by the way, is why you should never talk to the police. Okay, just some words of wisdom there. My dad is a police officer. And he always said, there's only 4 words that you should ever say to a cop. I want my lawyer. Okay? Nothing else. You should never say anything else. Well, if you talk to us, it'll look like you cooperate. I want my lawyer. Would you like a glass of water? I want my lawyer. Never say anything else to a cop besides you want your lawyer. Because it is so easy for you to be manipulated and for what you say to be manipulated. Okay? So never, ever, 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 ever talk to the cops. Okay. Okay, so point being, leading questions. We assume that things are going to be appropriate, that the information that we're given is correct. Okay, so if I say, did you see it stop at the yield sign? You assume that I'm not going to give incorrect information, that I'm not appropriately informing you of what's going on. Okay. Another thing that can happen with quantity is that sometimes people will, it's obvious that if I don't give you enough information, you're going to misunderstand it. But also people can give too much information, which can be overwhelming. And that's kind of what we see in these interrogations where they're there for hours and hours and hours, is the brain kind of shuts down and sort of goes into a trance state and it's not able to think logically anymore with that amount of input going into the brain. Okay. It's also what cults do to get you into the cult, is they'll put you through these really long, rigorous sessions of like praise or prayer or meditation or something, because the brain shuts down after too much input. It just can't handle it anymore. And then you become very easy to persuade and convince of things. All right, relation, okay? Is it relevant or is it irrelevant? So a lot of times you will see irrelevant information being given that doesn't really have anything to do with the situation that you're dealing with or the product that you're looking at, but it's there in order to persuade you in certain ways, okay? And you think it's important, but it's not. So like one example is alternative medicine, okay? It uses irrelevant language to gain credibility. So for instance, evidence-based medicine is often described as like traditional Western medicine, okay, words like that. Conventional. And then alternative medicine is often described as like complementary or integrative. Okay, and it's not really relevant to whether the medicine works or doesn't work. Okay. So these labels really take away from the truthfulness of the situation. They just add sort of like inflammatory language that doesn't help you to decide whether it works or not. If I say this is traditional medicine or this is Western medicine, if I'm talking about your antibiotics, are you going to be like, oh, well, that's just Western medicine. It's not integrative medicine. Right? I don't care about that. I just want to see the research of how well it works. Like, does this cure my infection? Okay. So this is extra information that's really taking away from the solidness of what you're being told instead of adding to it. Okay. And then manner. With manner, we see the idea of holism come up again. Remember we talked about that holistic stuff? Your author is very negative on the idea of holism. I think it can go either way. I think holistic is wonderful and holistic is problematic. Okay, so that's my personal opinion. Now, I went to a school that really pushed holism, so I am biased, but it pushed research-based holism. So holism can be used as a manipulative tactic where it confiscates, it obscures the meaning of things or the truthfulness of things. So it takes it away from being clear and concise. Where instead of like, here's the specific problem, here's the specific evidence behind it, you start reaching out into this world of, well, we need to look at the whole thing, we need to look at the whole picture, the whole person. You can't just look at this one little part. And remember that example of holism that we saw the video of, you can never quite be wrong. You can also never quite be right using the holistic argument, at least in that way. Now, there are ways of dealing with holism and being holistic in ways that are very helpful. So you can say, as far as our scientific understanding goes, we will be holistic. So an example that the book uses is, if you break your leg, you want to go in and you want to get a cast on your leg. You don't want to be treated holistically. Well, and that's fine, but if you break your leg, you could also now have extra pressure being put on the other knee, and now you start having knee issues in that other knee. That would be a holistic view, that we understand that when one leg gets injured, you put more weight onto the other one, and now you could end up with problems in the other leg because of it. So holistically, we're going to understand that this one specific issue has a broader range of implications. Okay, so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on the holistic thing, even though that's what the author for sure does. He or she, I don't even know, doesn't like the idea of holism at all. But that's because it can be used to be very manipulative, and it is often used to be manipulative. Okay, it can be used in a very good scientific way as well, where we're just maintaining an awareness that this issue is influenced by and influences many other things. Okay, that's holism in a scientific way, right? But you can see, hopefully from the last example where we talk about holism, how it can take things away from being clear and concise. Okay. So point being that we make the assumption when we communicate with somebody that they're going to follow these rules, but they often don't. It's often violated, particularly in advertisements, okay? Because the whole point of advertising is to manipulate you. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about real quick is false dichotomies. So I touched on this in the abortion argument, pro-choice, pro-life. Okay, so you are either pro-choice or you are pro-life. Okay? But that is a false dichotomy. That's saying there's only two options when the truth is that there's a continuum in between them. Okay. How many of you would say you fall somewhere in the middle? Okay, one person's brave enough to answer. All right, would you be willing to explain your beliefs?
I mean, maybe it's more pro-choice, but I think for me personally, I have 2 kids already, so for me, I would be pro-life because I know what it's like to give birth, and I know, for me personally, in my honest opinion, why would another child that I was pregnant with not deserve the life that my 2 kids have now?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see it, but I also think everyone can have their own opinion. But
Okay, so
with the understanding also, don't just open your legs or don't just,
mm-hmm.
Do all that without thinking of what you're doing either.
Yeah, so it's a very nuanced argument, right? There's a lot of pieces to it, which of course is why it's so controversial and we argue so much about it. So for you personally, you lean more towards the pro-life side, but you also aren't opposed to people being given the choice of whether they have an abortion or not. Okay, so if we only had these 2 choices, then pro-choice would be saying that everybody in every situation, no matter how old the baby is, should be allowed to have an abortion. And extreme pro-choicers, by the way, also include born children. So like in China, they do abortions up to 5 years old. So if we really only had these 2 choices, then some people argue up through the toddler years, because 5-year-olds, how could they live on their own? Because that's one of the arguments, right? They can't survive independent of their parents up until a certain age. And usually we say that that's like, I think 23 weeks or something now is what we can keep a baby alive at. But then you could take that argument further and say, well, can a 1-year-old survive on their own without their parents? Could a 5-year-old survive? A 6-year-old maybe could. Okay, 5-year-old, I don't think so. But a 6-year-old probably could. Okay. And then some people could, I've even heard say, well, why can't we abort teenagers? Because really, can they really live independently of their parents? So why don't we have the choice at that age? Okay. So it's not only 2 choices, right? There's a whole range of options in there. And pro-life people often are like, well, yeah, but what about like if the woman's raped? Or what if it's incest or something like that? So many pro-lifers even have exceptions to these rules, right? So it really is not an either or. That's what we call a false dichotomy. It's not 2 choices. There's an entire spectrum of choices in between. So to get mad at somebody because they say I'm pro-life or because they say I'm pro-choice is stupid, right? You need to say, what do you mean by that? Like, what exactly do you believe? And you have to establish that. You have to be clear and concise, right? Before you could even start talking about things. And you have to understand that this is a false dichotomy. To say I'm pro-choice or pro-life does not hold a lot of meaning into itself, okay? Because they could believe teenagers should be aborted, or they could believe like the only exception to not being allowed abortions is like if the mother's going to die or something like that, or it could be totally to the point where I don't believe in abortions for any reason. So you don't know unless you delve into that idea and actually find out what it means, okay? And false dichotomies also lead to, this is the last thing we're going to talk about, the slippery slope problem. Okay? The slippery slope is if I say this is okay, then, I take one step onto that slope and I say there's one exception. Now you can be pushed further down the slope. Well, if this is okay then so is this. So like if I'm pro-life and I say absolutely no abortions, all life is sacred, doesn't matter. Well, what about if the mom is going to die? Mom and baby are going to die. So what would it matter at that point? And I go, okay, that exception. Well, if that's okay, then isn't this okay? And now you're on that slippery slope. Now you can be pushed a little bit further and a little further and a little further. Okay? And so people are often afraid to come out of their extreme positions because it puts them on the slippery slope. And this is a legitimate thing. This absolutely does happen. Okay? It happens all the time. It's very easy. Once you push somebody a little bit, it's easier to push them a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more until you have major changes in personal beliefs or even cultural wide beliefs. Okay, so it is a legitimate fear. And this is one reason why people are so extreme in their beliefs, because they believe if they give a little bit, then you're going to take even more. And they're afraid of that happening. So that's something that you have to consider if you're arguing with somebody. And it's not just abortion, it's anything. And even in your personal relationships, people are often afraid that if I give in, then you're going to now ask for way more. And so you have to let people know you're willing to be reasonable, which like in the current political climate, we're not seeing that at all. Like there's no indication of reasonableness whatsoever. And so people are very extreme in their beliefs because they're terrified the other side is going to go so far if they give in even a little bit. Okay? So to get people willing to compromise on something, you have to show them that you're not going to abuse their willingness to bend.